Recording in progress.
Good evening. This is the July 2026 Chicago Computer Society Linux SIG meeting. I will open up the floor to questions, problems, comments, things everybody might like to know about that you know about. So who wants to start it off? Don't everybody join in immediately. You can only do one at a time. Okay. And I'm gonna try and see if I can.
Tim,
No, he ain't here. What's up?
what is a simple Linux question that almost anybody here, but I forgot, can answer? What is the size of the recommended thumb drive to put on to place the install file for Linux Mint current version?
You can probably do it with an 8 gig, otherwise 16 gig. The bad part is if you use bigger drives because that's all you've got and you don't want to go shopping for some of the old unsold 8 and 16s, you'd have to take and sacrifice whatever's on those bigger drives by copying the content off if you want to keep it. And then when you put the installation of Mint on the flash drive, you're going to wipe out whatever is there first, either with Balena Etcher or Rufus. It doesn't matter which one. And there are other writers too. In fact, you can even get a version of Fedora's downloader that a lot of people seem to like. But in any case, 8 gigs is more than enough, unless you might run into a problem with some of the new Ubuntu and Debian Trixies. They might need a bit more than 8, but a 16 has always worked for me, and you have plenty of space left over.
Yeah, as the flash drives get bigger, it makes more and more sense to put a whole suite of utilities on them. And this is done by taking the ISO images and putting them into a multi-boot environment such as Ventoy.
Or Yummy, one of the two.
Either one.
Yeah, and that's what I've been doing more and more is using a this is 128 gigabyte. It's strictly for Ventoy, and I have ISO images on that, including GParted Live, so that I can run GParted even on Windows systems to monkey around with partitions. That's how I took the 2 Windows 11 machines that I needed to rebuild a larger UEFI on. That's what I used. So all I did was take and move all my partitions, because most of my drives, but not all of them, I leave a raw space called over provisioning, so that the controller on the device can put dying cell information that it can recover into that unused raw space. It uses it kind of the way old spinning hard drives had a reserve 10% space on them you couldn't touch, and it will take any bad sectors, try and salvage what they can, put it into there, change linkages of the sectors involved, and you don't even notice that you have bad areas on a spinning hard drive. Well, it works similarly on an SSD. The bad part is you have to take, in that case, I wanted to take 400 megabytes. Okay, you only have a couple choices. Now, Bob already explained his way of doing it. If you got a reserve area that Microsoft created on Windows, you eliminate that reserve area, and you can use 400 megabytes of that space to enlarge the UEFI. And the only thing you may have to do is rebuild the content of the UEFI, because as you expand the space, that 400 megabytes is not usable because it hasn't been formatted. So the norm is to reformat the partition, and there's an existing tool on a repair image of Windows 11 and 10 that allows you to go and select the UEFI partition, sign a drive letter, format the drive with just the format command, and then exit out of that tool and run another tool that will rebuild the entire bootloader for you. And the only problem is you're going to have to turn off secure boot if it's turned on in your BIOS before you start. Always make a backup anyhow. And then you have to, before you reboot the computer to use the new rebuilt UEFI, you turn on the secure boot, because otherwise Windows usually will not recognize and run on your system because the secure boot is been turned off to rebuild that area. And that's one of the headaches.
Yeah, Tim, the one thing I would slightly correct is in addition to that Microsoft Reserve partition, you might have to shrink the Windows System partition and borrow a little space from there.
Well, what I did explicitly, because I have the over provisioning, I move all partitions except the UEFI to the right, 400 megabytes in space.
Okay.
Now I got the 400 megabytes, but it takes a long time to do it because C is a dog. And then I resize the UEFI. I go into the repair tool Windows provides, very old, very primitive tool.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time to learn how to use it. I sign a drive letter. I format the partition, get out of the tool, go in repair environment again in command mode, issue a proper command of boot BCD, give it the parameters for the C Windows with a /S following it, followed by the drive letter and a colon that I assign to the UEFI partition. Then after that, a space with a /F, space in capital letters UEFI, done.
Does the macrim reflect boot repair feature? Does that work if you have had to rebuild or if you've completely changed the UEFI boot partition? Will the macrim reflect tool still work?
I haven't tried it, and part of the reason why I haven't tried it is the fact that when you are playing with the UEFI, you cannot go into macrim reflect as just an arbitrary example, copy the old UEFI back into the new partition.
No.
That usually will not work.
No, it won't.
And
that's not really what the tool does, of course. It rebuilds the boot files.
Understood. But at the moment, most of the tools that do that don't always play nice with Windows. I don't
Okay.
blame them, but I at the same time too, it's a case where do you take the time to try and use a tool that may or may not work? And
Yeah.
second of all, um, or do you take and use Microsoft's own tools that do the job correctly?
Now this does tie into Linux. If you happen to be running Linux in any form, shape, or manner connecting to that same machine, when you change this UEFI partition, you have changed what in Linux is called the UUID. And that means you have to go into your Linux and you have to go into etc fs tab and you have to update that UUID,
That,
which means you need a Linux Live to do that.
now, at the moment, I have not run into that problem because I'm not doing a single drive dual boot. I have two machines at the moment that have dual drives. And I got the second drive because I said, the heck with the optical drive. It's useless, antique. And
Yeah.
I replace it with a 2.5-inch drive adapter for the optical drive. I put a drive in there, and I have two separate operating systems on their own disk, and I haven't had the problem with the UUID of the Windows drive causing a problem with the Linux operating system.
Here's where I had it. I run my Linux off of enclosures,
Yes.
which attach by USB.
Right.
But the UEFI boot partition is on the internal drive.
Right. Okay.
It can also be set up with the UEFI boot for Linux. They call it EFI something something something.
Yeah.
But anyway, that boot partition can be on an external enclosure as well.
Well, the thing is, with me, at any rate, I use USB external drives too for Linuxes on Windows systems, and I haven't run into the UID problem that you're talking about. So there's something you're doing and I'm doing that are different enough that it's causing you a problem, and I'm oblivious to the problem.
It depends on whether or not the EFI ESP partition is shared by Windows and Linux, regardless of where the Linux physically is. If they share the same EFI boot partition, that's where the UUID will come in.
I'm pretty sure, but I could be absolutely wrong. It usually comes in on a single drive dual boot.
That's the most usual case, but it can happen if you installed your Linux by choosing the ESP boot to be the same UEFI that is used by Windows, even though the Linux root partition is somewhere else.
Well, apparently I'm not trying to share it.
No, you probably created a new one for Linux.
Yes. And that's
And
getting to be a bigger issue than a lot of people are understanding. One of the people that's not here tonight, Earl McCoy, boy, he was really up in arms over needing a Windows certificate update, and he had no desire to have anything to do with the UEFI partition, but he doesn't set up his own system. I have to set it up for him. And it required the UEFI at the time, so he's got a UEFI partition, period.
Yeah.
And at the same time, too, he's not here tonight, and that's what I was hoping for, because that he would be here, because one of the first presentation things is something he created, and I wanted him to do the presentation and his reasoning for it. I can only show you what he created, and we can only speculate what he was thinking of at the time.
Hmm.
Let's see here. I've got two things there. And what I'm going to do now, have we gone through all that? No, I see somebody's rotten hand. That's a new message I got.
Okay, so the reason I brought that up is because I don't know how many computers right now. I don't know what they are, but in my STEAM program at the school, we're probably going to take some old ones that they were going to recycle, desktops. I don't know what they are yet, and put Linux on them, and then give them to the kids to take home, so they don't end up in the landfill or taken apart as e-cycle.
Right.
So I think I know the school has bought a number, and I probably have 4 or 5. I think they're 16 gig, but so the 16 gigs will work for putting Linux on. Linux Mint to act as the install media in the boot from, and then to install it from.
Yeah, but I mean, the 16 gig that we were talking about before the start of the recording is for creating the boot media. Mint will run in 2 gigs of RAM memory. Yeah, I don't recommend it because it'll run on the slow side, depending what your CPU is. Because the CPU, when you get into some of the machines, an awful lot of them are dual core, and probably like an i3, an i5. I'd be amazed if you saw an i7, and only a 7 would have hyper threading to make the 2 cores appear to be 4 cores. But there are models, especially in Haswell, that are an i5 is 4 straight cores, no hyper threading, and you it's strictly for the desktop, not for an all-in-one.
These are not all-in-ones. These are desktops. I told them we're not going to mess around with any Chromebooks.
But
And
the odds
they
are,
all had Windows 10 running on them, but they're not eligible for Windows 11, so they don't want to use them in the school.
understood, but the majority of them, if not all of them, will be a 2-core processor. So you have to know what processor is inside. If you take the Linux boot disk, run it as a live situation, no installation yet, and run, go into your terminal and put in ls CPU. It'll tell you about what the processor is. You can look that up on another computer to get the characteristics of that CPU, both TDP ratings, how many real cores, does it have hyper-threading or not, etc., etc. Because they are desktop computers, you can, if you want to, shop for on eBay and other places for replacement CPUs. And let's just say that offhand, one of the machines had i5-4460. It's a two-core CPU. However, you could change that to a i5-4570 or 90, get 4 cores. You can also replace it with an i7 4770 or a 4790 and get 4 cores with hyper threading and use it on the same exact machine. That's if it's that first 4 is what generation the CPU is. If it's a 3, you can still get some of that in the version 3. It's harder to get it for something older than that. And they all ran 10, but they cannot touch 11 unless you create a copy of Windows 11 ISO that is tailored by Rufus to eliminate all the security problems that 11 normally expects for, and then you can install that on the old equipment. You got to ask yourself, am I a person who will, if I run into problems, call up Microsoft for tech support, who will ask for my charge card, and if they work on the problem, knowing that it's an unsupported system, you better be saying, I'll pay whatever they want. Because otherwise,
it's not me that's going to be paying. So the idea is keep these things out of eCycle for a while and let the kids play with them.
That's fine.
So
but I'm just saying.
Putting Mint on them gives them an operating system that's up and coming.
It'll work with
they can take home,
they will work with any version of Linux. I guarantee it.
What? I know they'll work for Linux. Because I'll make sure that the model
these are options that can be done with any old equipment. Period.
But okay, so I'm turning these things over to 8th through 12th graders.
That's fine.
Yeah. So I want to give them something that they can play with that isn't going to kill mom and dad's computer. That's one. And we'll keep it out of the eCycle for a year or so at best, maybe 2. The school will probably give them the monitors and the keyboards and the mice because they're not going to use them anymore.
Right.
So they'll have a complete system, and they're going to put on Linux, and they're going to be the ones that actually install it.
That's fine. Just so the one thing that you may run into, and it shouldn't be a problem, is the RAM memory. The RAM memory, as long as it's got 4 gigabytes or more of memory, you're okay. If you
everything I've seen from the school has gotten 4 or 8 gig of RAM, so I'm okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. That's all you need. If you have only 2 gigs of memory, try and upgrade those to a 4 instead of just 2 gigs. 4 gigs will run Mint quite well, unless they want to play games. That's a different story.
At the point where they're starting to play games, it's on their bank and not mine.
Well, I understand.
We're probably going to only have it in the classroom for 3 or 4 weeks.
Whatever.
One is they plug in the they change it so it can boot from USB, because I don't think any of them can boot from USB right now. That's step 1. Put in the USB and use the first session off the Linux Live to look around to see what it's about. And then the second session will go through the install. And then the third session and fourth session will probably do some of the customizations. And I've only got like 2 hours per session, so I got to be very careful on time.
That's normal as far as that goes. As long as they got the 4 gigs, they aren't going to believe how good that system will run for them, even if it's got only 2 cores. It sure
The
will beat the
hardest
heck
part
up.
I'm gonna have is making sure that parents understand, get the correct permissions from the parents and sign-offs from the kids and the parents saying that they're taking full responsibility on these things and that they're gonna have admin rights. Because they're installing it, so they're gonna know the admin password from day one. And I know that, so I need to get a very secure, a comprehensive permission slip created for them,
Okay.
just to cover my ass.
Well, just watch it, because one little gotcha is a lot of hacking that's going on right now are kids. Kids are doing a lot of the hacking, even ransomware, even if it's just a fake ransomware to get money out of people. Not joking. It's become a very prominent problem with kids that law enforcement is aware of. Catching them, I don't know how well the government entities are at catching the offenders. I just know that they have reported on the escalation of young people, mostly adolescents, doing the hacking. Okay,
That's one of the reasons I don't want them in the school any longer than they need to be.
well, I understand. It's the bad part is a lot of parents, they may sign off on the paper, but when it comes to actually monitoring what the kids are doing on the machines, they abdicate that. They want the machine to occupy the kid and keep them out of their hair. And then when something bad happens, it's somebody else's fault, not mine. Let's see here. All right, one thing that I'm gonna start off with on this. This is something that Earl McCoy made up, but I don't know his reason. That's why I was hoping he would be here tonight, basically to talk you through it. I can't talk you through it as much as I would like. Share that and share that. Okay. Now come on, darn it. All right. All right. All right, there we have it. This is made by Earl. He sent it to me. It's in the chat if you want this slideshow. So every one of you can download this PowerPoint file. Basically, what I gather he's attempting to do that doesn't make sense to me, he's taken LibreOffice Impress, which has some characteristics like PowerPoint. He's making it more PowerPoint-like, which is Microsoft. And as I mentioned to those who were here before the meeting really started, he's against Microsoft and a lot of its stuff. So I don't know his reasoning why he wants to make this Impress work like a Microsoft product. And my only question is if he's got the idea in his head to also do LibreOffice Writer and Calc and make them more like the Microsoft counterparts. So why he's doing it, I don't know. So here you end up going to the user interface in Impress. You go to tabbed and apply all. Now exactly what the heck you're applying, I guess it's tabs in the toolbar is what's being changed.
The toolbar is becoming tabbed instead of being a ribbon.
I guess that's exactly what's going on. I don't know.
And this is in line with recent Microsoft PowerPoint editions.
Okay. I haven't used PowerPoint in a long time. In fact, I hardly ever use I've only used Impress, I think, twice. So I'm not a big fan of these programs because I don't want to spend the time it takes to design a good presentation. Anyway,
I hear about most of this stuff through the Ask Woody newsletter, which covers a lot of Windows stuff.
then he went to Appearance, changed it to Calibra, which was one of the main fonts for Windows products, but that's changed over time. So I don't know if Calibra is current or it's an older font that used to be used in Windows Office products. I do know that in Linux world, if you want a lot of close to real true type fonts that Microsoft uses, you have to add fonts, Microsoft fonts, to your system. And I know that there are at least 2 or 3 fonts that still will not work correctly, but somebody figured out replacement fonts for those 2 or 3 fonts that do work correctly. I don't remember enough about it. It was something that I came across, I think, early this year. The next is, I did not install Microsoft fonts. Well, that makes it tough to use this concept without those fonts.
And hence the choice of Calibra, which is shared between open source and Microsoft products.
Well, yeah, but I mean, when you get into a lot of the Microsoft products, there are a lot of people that try and use other fonts for one reason or another. They like a certain font that is not the standard default. They want this one instead. For if you go way back, probably, I'm gonna guess 2 decades at least, Comic Sans was quite popular. Now it's too cartoonish, so it hasn't been used in a couple decades. But when you don't do the fonts, that's when you're gonna start ending up making documents with a Linux font that is not backwards compatible if you gave it to somebody that only ran Microsoft software.
And this is what LibreOffice has, over the years, been trying to deal with. Calibra isn't just a font, it's a family of fonts in LibreOffice. It's not like in Microsoft where it's just one font.
Okay, well, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but you may also be stuck with just the one font. That's what I'm trying to get across.
As I say, you've got Calibra is more of a theme, and it contains several different what Microsoft would call fonts.
Right.
And they're grouped together into a package.
But if you add the Microsoft fonts, which is easily
Yeah.
viewable from the software manager into Linux, now you have more free play of what font you're using, which I'm not sure if he understood that factor or not.
I'm sure he understands it, but he is someone who really does not want non-free stuff like Microsoft stuff in his Linux.
Well, I understand that part. I'm only knowing, and I haven't used the Microsoft fonts myself, but at the same time, too, if I'm going to try and take Linux software, make it look and act like Microsoft software, I would probably want the flexibility of the doggone fonts to be supported as well, or at least most of the fonts that are available to Microsoft products. And that's what
Yeah.
I'm trying to get across. I see here, this is how they're using what they call the tab bar, the tab toolbar.
Yeah. And this is much more in line with how Microsoft presents things in
Yeah,
the current PowerPoint.
right. I think it's I'm used to the style as far as that goes. It's but I've not had any yearning to take and mimic the toolbar of Microsoft for the presentation. Um, it's a mindset, I guess. It depends upon what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it, and whether you are one that feels the need of having a good flexibility in the fonts that you're using being available backward wise to a person that's running a Windows system.
I think a lot of it is about communicating with people who do run Windows. It's a little easier if you can show them something that to them looks pretty much the same.
Well, that's again, that, and that's a very appropriate thought. It's a case where, okay, this is a Windows user coming over and looking at least at Linux. And still, the majority are using just a Word document and or Excel spreadsheet under Windows. Only a small percentage use a slideshow.
That depends on the environment. A lot of people who belong to user groups do slideshows quite frequently, actually. And I've
In,
run into this with several other user groups I belong to.
in some of the user groups, I 100% agree. Quite a few of them do make and use a display. But the kicker is how many of the non-presenters are using a tool like this?
In at least one of these groups, everyone sooner or later presents.
Okay.
So everyone gets interested
How big is
in
that
how do you
group?
do it.
How big is that group?
I at least 40 people on a regular basis, 200 total members in Lexington, Massachusetts.
Okay. That's a pretty high percentage as far as I'm concerned, even if it's just 40. So
Yeah.
most people don't know and haven't been in their working years part of a business where they had to create internally for business meetings of the company presentations.
Okay. A lot of these people were employees of companies like Raytheon, the MIT various labs that they had, and they graduated from MIT. They were engineers in their careers, and yeah, lots of presentations happened.
That's right. And those are the people that'll be a presenter even in a user group more often than not. The majority of people that are in user groups don't have that kind of a background. So the end result is this is a tool they normally would not see. So that makes this presentation he put together here kind of an oddball, okay? In the sense that he's presenting a tool to from a Linux perspective that can be made to look and act a great deal like a Microsoft counterpart that
Yeah.
most are not going to know and probably are not going to want to use anyhow. That's where, is he thinking of trying to do the same basic thing in to the writer and calc in LibreOffice? That would make more sense because more people will use those two pieces of software in a Linux environment.
Well, I'm sure that sooner or later Earl will do some kind of follow up with that kind of thing. Anyway,
That's
what
what I
else?
say. I wish he had shown up and let him explain what
Yeah.
his thinking was behind this.
Okay, well, anyway, what else did he say?
And this is more of getting into the tabbed toolbar and what you might see, etc. And it looks like it might help somebody transferring to a Linux and LibreOffice that wants to make a presentation be able to feel a little more comfortable and at home, but they'll feel better in most instances if they install what he did not, and that is the Microsoft fonts through Software Manager. And then if I were to find the reference that I came across, somebody created 2 or 3 fonts that out of the Microsoft fonts that don't work, replacements for those fonts, and you end up being able to get all those standardized fonts you would expect to see in a Microsoft environment now in a Linux presentation environment. And that would make it a little bit better for those who are more experienced. If somebody comes to this and says, I've never done a presentation, I don't know how the program works. Question, would this help them to make it look more like PowerPoint? Or would it be something that really is irrelevant and they would be better off just learning how to use Impress as it is?
I'm not going to argue with you about that, Tim.
Well, it's not an argument. It's just a case where we have something odd here that I can't myself wrap my head around completely, since he doesn't like a lot of Microsoft stuff. And that's perfectly fine. That's understandable. But most people coming from Windows, dipping their toes into Linux, trying to get an idea of how to work in a Linux environment and use LibreOffice, I can't envision there being that many people that would try and do what this suggests. And that's my only opinion of it. Peter?
Yeah, so can I share this presentation out?
Well, hang on. Let me finish it off, and then you can.
Oh, wait a second. I can going forward. outside of the group, can I share this, can I use this presentation somewhere else? The reason I'm asking is because I can't remember if the school uses the Office suite or some other suite on its machines that are native to the school. But I'm giving Linux boxes to the kids. And this is where this might actually be of value, because they could then use the instructions here to change the LibreOffice to look closer and work closer to what they see at school.
Only,
Now, whether they can share the files.
only in the Impress, not in Calc or Writer, unless there's another type modification like this for those two applications.
Okay, but a lot of
I
times,
can't answer the
I don't
question.
know what they're,
I can't answer that
I know.
question.
That is why I'm asking if I can actually use it outside of the group.
Oh, yeah. He gave this
Okay.
do with what I want to with it. And so this is something that can be used as a guide. I'll eventually go back to the first slide. Hang on a minute.
Yeah, this is based on a YouTube video. So there's
Yeah.
more that you can see in action.
Okay. Now, if you come back here, there's a reference down here to Learn Light Express. I didn't go there. I don't know what it is for sure, but they may be the actual creators of this modification. Therefore, they may have a document that tells you how to go about doing this.
The source is a YouTube video, which is linked in that slide.
Oh, okay.
It says source,
Okay.
YouTube video.
Well, again, but it still goes to this outfit.
Yeah, they are the
And-
people who made the video.
Well, they may also have a modifier for the write and the calc.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know. I haven't checked it out. So if one of you guys want to, check out the YouTube video, check out this Learn
Okay.
Light Express. And if they've got one for the writer and the calc, that's good too. So bottom line is there. Now, Peter, you might have an excellent example where the machines that you are modifying for a Linux Mint, which comes with Office, LibreOffice, they possibly could take and modify the writer, the calc, and the impress to look more like an environment in the Microsoft world they were in Windows 10.
What? No.
And may be also in Windows 11 on the school's new machines. So that might be
Yeah, that's
at least one use for this. I don't know.
So going forward with tonight, I opened up
When it comes to finding a
What do you
suitable
call it?
alternative for Microsoft Office,
Software Manager, and what's the link to get to the Microsoft fonts? What's it called in?
Microsoft Fonts. MS space fonts. Or I
Okay.
don't remember if there's a space in there or not. Hang on a minute here.
Okay,
Oops.
it's MS space fonts.
Yeah.
And it's installer for
And
Microsoft
you
two
have the
types.
installer there.
Okay,
Like I said, I know I've come across documentation earlier this year where two or three of these fonts still will not work right in Microsoft Office. but somebody figured out how to make replacement fonts that can be downloaded to replace those two or three fonts, and they do work correctly.
So one other question here. Where in Linux is the fonts file saved?
Home directory in a I forget what the title is, but I think it's MS TT fonts or something like that.
Oh,
Actually not true.
Oh, it's not?
They're in USR, share, fonts, true type.
Well,
And then it becomes MSTT core fonts.
okay. Well, I thought the
But
TT
for a single user, they are in home.local share fonts
right.
or dot fonts.
That's where they go initially. Then the installation process puts a copy into other locations, and it may be beyond USR folder. There may be additional folders that also contain a copy of the fonts. The home directory is where you're initially downloading this stuff into. It's more like a backup, in a matter of speaking.
LibreOffice fonts may be stored in opt, which is where the program is.
That could be. Like I say, what they do is they load this stuff into the home folder. Then the installation process copies it into one or more other locations. USR is sometimes needed for certain program applications to run or access certain features. And if it goes into the ops folder, that's perfectly fine too. It could even be other places. I don't know. I never really installed it on any of my machines.
When I installed it system-wide, and so it ends up available to different programs, not just to one or two programs, and it's available to every user. So that install does go into USR.
Yeah, and that's
USR, and what after that?
Pardon?
What after that?
Let me grab it. And also the example given by the AI is for only Office. Here it goes into chat.
Well, only Office is the parent of LibreOffice.
They're related.
Like I said, it was the parent. It was the original for LibreOffice fork was developed.
It was Apache OpenOffice, actually.
Well, OpenOffice is OpenOffice. They just keep changing who the creator and maintainer is. Apache was trying to make money off of it, and then finally it got taken over by the open source community because Apache wasn't doing crap with it. And that's why also people forked off of it and made LibreOffice. And then probably made several of the other online ones like OnlyOffice and whatever the European Union modifies their copy to look like and act like.
Yeah, the European Union sourced apparently directly from OnlyOffice.
Yeah, and that's a Russian made, and it has some Russian scripting inside of it they don't want to see at all.
Yep.
So they're going to take that as the original copy that they are forking to make the European version for solidarity purposes.
Yeah, for sovereignty purposes.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's user share and fonts.
That's
the-
the system-wide. That's a system-wide place where it
That's
goes.
right, because
That's
I've got multiple users on.
like I say, it comes down into the home directory of you, whoever downloaded it, into the home directory. When you install the package, it puts it into other areas that are global. But let's say you
Right.
had a partition setup like I have and other people in this group have had. Now you take and have to rebuild the root partition, possibly the UEFI and boot partition if you got that, and tell it, I've got a home partition, I got maybe a var partition for flat packs and virtual machines, etc. And when you rebuild, it leaves those two alone and only rebuilds the other ones. That's going to wipe out the true type fonts that are in the root. So you have to go into the home of the person who downloaded the MS fonts and reinstall it. And now it becomes global again in, it sounds like at least 2 or more root partition folders. Because normally we would not break out USR and we would not break out the OPT.
Right.
So if you didn't have it already in the home directory, you'd have to go back out, remember to go out to the software manager, download the sucker again, reinstall the application every time you have to rebuild the root.
Yeah, you would have your original download in your downloads, which is part of your user home.
Right. So it's just a case where it's convenient place to put new applications in the home folder, and it's easier to reinstall them, just like you have to do with Zoom. You have to do the same thing with Zoom as the MS fonts or many other applications that go into the home folder, whether it's in the download folder or a separate folder, and you have to reinstall those things anytime you rebuild the root. Otherwise, they don't function, let alone for all users of that machine. And for what Peter's talking about with the kids, they're each going to have their own machine to do with, and so there'll only probably be one person on each of those machines.
One thing I would do, Pete, I would teach the kids how to back up their software markings in Synaptic or whatever manager they're using. If you can back up your software markings for everything you've installed that came from the repository, then it's a lot simpler just to do that one-step restore from file.
And that means because of a change in policy in Mint, you have to install the Synaptic package.
Yeah, Synaptic Package Manager, and you would be installing the package that's in that repo.
And as soon as you launch it, you have to do a reload. Yeah, actually, anytime you bring up Synaptic's package manager, you have to do a reload so that it reads everything that's in the system at that point in time.
Yeah.
As a kind of an update of where am I at? Because the last time I ran was 3 years ago and a month.
Synaptic Package Manager does have its own update,
Right.
which you need to do. It will read what's on your system, and it'll bring itself up to date.
Right. That's why you have to always do a reload on Synaptic's package.
And the same thing applies to your Mint Package Manager.
Oh,
You should always reload it at least once. Actually, you have to reload it twice in most instances because it won't pick up everything the first time if it's been a while.
yes. And I do that religiously anyhow, because I use a terminal tool that I built. And
Yeah.
but I go to the regular update manager of Mint and see how many it sees. And I had that happen today. It showed 5 updates. Well, that's usually over my limit, and I will use my routine through the terminal. But in this case here, I still ran reload the image or refresh the image. And when it did that, it turned from 5 to 8 packages. Half were flat pack, half were regular packages. And from there, I just fired up my desktop icon that runs in the terminal, gave it my password, and it goes through lickety-split, gets the whole job done, disappears off the screen. The one thing you don't know is a restart required? For me, at least, I don't care. I restart it anyhow, just to be safe, because I have no way of capturing whether there was a kernel update. And then on the regular update manager, I just run refresh a second time. Usually it comes back as all up to date. Today, it added one more package, so I let it update that one package. Didn't require any restart. But that's part of how I do my stuff. Let me.
Flatpak has its own way of saving its markings. You can use export and import. But Flatpak is separate from apt or synaptic.
Yes, but I don't use it that way. I use it, I get the updates straight through the normal update routine.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm not talking about getting the updates. I'm talking about if you need to save your software markings in case you need to do a rebuild.
True. That's true. But that's where I break out my var folder as a separate partition.
Yeah.
I don't have to do that.
Yeah. Breaking out var is good for whether you're using Flatpak or whether you're using virtual machines or whatever. Containers.
Boy, when that thing share gets in my way.
So are we through? Have we gotten through the slideshow?
Yeah, we went through the whole slideshow as far as.
Yeah, it's just 7 slides.
This here is my updater, and what it does is it runs in the terminal. And excuse me, that's emblems. Permissions, I have to turn that on because it's a safety in Linux. So you have to allow it to execute. Here's the basics. It's running the terminal using a bash command script here to run a hidden cleanup of .sh shell file. And then after that completes, hang on a second here, it does an execution of bash exit. That makes the terminal disappear. If I took that last execution after the semicolon on the .sh, it would leave the terminal up and you'd have to manually close it. Okay. Now, besides doing a update, and it does some limited cleanup that helps, shall we say, manage accumulation of material in your root directory and in your home directory. to a very, very limited degree. And this is going to drive me nuts. It does things it wants to do, not what I want to do. And cleanup SH is here. And I'll open it up, display only. And this is it. This is the whole thing. This here does the whole upgrade, including flat packs. Now I have information up here. If you were using this on Ubuntu that wants snap packs, you would replace this command with the command to do snap packages. If your installation is using both snaps and flat packs, you'd add the snap pack update in here. It has all the yes requirements, so it does not stop and pause. Then it takes and it does auto remove, it does clean and auto clean, which do two different things. And then it has vacuum. And when it's done, it says cleanup complete, and it disappears so fast you might not be able to read it. And then you're completely up to date when that's done, as far as the time it started and got the update information. But if an update came in after it read in the new database, it doesn't see that until the next time you run, or you run the regular updater program. So it depends upon each individual user. I have here the ability to zoom my texting with a desktop icon. You just double click it and it made things a specified amount bigger. You have to specify the exact size. It's kind of like a fixed zoom. And then double click this one here, it's back to normal. I have Fire Jail, not only for Firefox, but for a native Chromium package install. I can also add with this Fire Tools desktop icon other programs. It's a type of sandboxing. How good it is, I don't know, but any sandboxing helps protect your system to one degree or another. Then I have terminal here. I have terminal down on the taskbar. But if I open up the one on the taskbar called the panel in Linux, it opens up a native basic terminal. If I double click this desktop icon, it instead opens up, and normally on Mint it will run NeoFetch, but I downloaded and changed it from NeoFlex to run Fast Flex. It gives more detailed information about the system that you're running on. And this is very important, especially when you're asking someone else for some kind of help on a Linux system, what you're running and what the characteristics of your system are, because this may give that helper information they need to make certain decisions as to what may be causing your problem and how to fix it. For example, if this thing said, I have only 2 gigs of memory and I don't like how slow it is, simple solution, add 2 more gigs of memory and you've got a much better performing system. You can, in some systems that have more than 2 slots, more memory, up to 8 gigs is all you need. to run Linux fabulously, whether you're using the GNOME desktop, KDE desktop, Mint, or some other desktop. Whereas with some old equipment, you have to use very lightweight versions. I have at my feet at the moment a laptop. I'm not going to bring it up. It's real old. I forget the age of it. But the laptop is a low cost, kind of an entry level machine. It has 4 gigabytes soldered onto the motherboard and one SODIMM slot to give RAM expansion. And I had to even do a BIOS update to be able to use bigger than 4 gigabyte memory module in there, so I can go up to 12 gigs. So, but if I wanted to, I could have left it as is. I could have added a 2 gig module or a 4 gig module. Doing the BIOS update, I put in an 8 gig. So you can end up not only having the 4 gigs to begin with, you can go to 6, 8, 12, but you can't go to 16 or higher. Not in this old machine. It's a 4-core Pentium processor, and it does not have much horsepower, even with that amount of memory. It's DDR3 memory, I know that. And for that, I noticed Linux Lite version 8 recently came out, and they made a lot of substantial improvements. It uses the XFCE desktop, which I'm not real fond of, but I can live with in some cases. It works pretty good, but there's one other desktop icon that I use, and this is something built into a lot of the Linux distros. If you do if you use Catfish as an example, but you can also use your Explorer program to do the same kind of a search. I don't know how fast that is. Catfish runs pretty good. You get that off Software Manager. And basically, you look for CPU power. This is a built-in command line, but to put in all the parameters that might be altered, it's not for most people. So I found out there's a CPU power CPU power dash GUI. You have to use version 1 or higher. Originally Mint will complain, I've got a version of that in Software Manager, but at least in the past, the version they had, whoops, got the wrong one. Hang on a minute here. Software Manager, CPU POWER -GU. Oops. GUI. Okay. Now, if I open this up, it fairly recently upgraded to version 1.0.0-2. For a long time, it was a 0.7.2 something, and that's too old. Now, why do I run that program? Let's see. Okay, now I'm going to get rid of this because it's bleeding out the other. Now, on a lot of my systems, because a lot of them are old, I change things. Now, first off, you can change individual cores in the CPU to whatever you want. Or you put a check mark down here and it will change all the cores to what you to one setting. Now, why do I do that? It has to do with this first line here, minimum frequency. I'm currently set up with 800 megahertz. I can change that just like this to 1100 or 1.1 gigahertz. Why would I do it? It makes snappier performance. If you don't have a laptop, you don't have a battery. So there's no problem changing the idle speed. However, when it comes to the bottom line, maximum, unless you have a CPU that ends with a K, you cannot overclock, not with this tool. However, down at the bottom, I can do power save as a governor, or I can change it to performance. And I can also do energy preferences, balance performance, or I can change it to default, straight high performance, or balance power, which is less than balance performance, or I can change it to power, and I forget what it did, but I think it gave you a way of modifying how much power savings it does. Then I can go to the second, which is preferences. I turn on energy performance preference per CPU, which is per core. I turn that on. And I usually these come up automatically turned on. One's for toggling all CPUs to enable the same setting. Display tick marks and display frequency at tick marks. Then you go to profile. Up here, I put in whatever name I'm logging in with as my preference. And in this case, I would type in Tim because that's my login name. And then click here and it saves the settings, which it already did previously. So I'm not going to do that download again. It would replace it if I made a significant change. Now, once I have the settings, I can apply. If this dims out because of the download that I did, I just come back over a profile and I say apply, and it will apply the settings, asking me for authorization. And once I've got that done, it now, if I go back to settings, it's set at whatever I set in these other screens, mostly on this screen here, and one I did here on this screen. And every time I log in, I have it set up to run this utility. And it only asks me for my authorization password, and it has a timeout. So if you're a little bit asleep at the switch, you may time out before you get your password in and hit the enter key. So you gotta be aware that it's there. And all that is I close that, I can come over to here, and go to type startup applications. from here. I created a key right here, first one. Usually Bluetooth is in here, but I don't use Bluetooth, at least on this computer, so I deleted it. Otherwise, I turn it off and I'll turn it on when I want to use it on a machine. SSH I turned off because I use it very limited. And the rest of them are, except for the bottom one, the X app watcher. I turn that off, but I can turn it back on at any time. The key here is on this one here. It's selected, hit the pencil for editing, and this is what it does. And I set the startup delay to 1 second so that it's not popping up the request for permission instantly and possibly timing out before I can put in the password. You can change this to anything you want, but normally it defaults to 0. I change it to 1. That gives me enough time. I'll see the screen. I'll type in my password, hit enter, and that profile takes immediate effect and stays that way until you do a reboot. If you just do a logout, it stays in effect. Why, I'm not certain, but I didn't bother researching it. I didn't care. So those are some of the tools I create. This down here is a application that I showed once before. It requires X11 to run, and it imitates the performance tab in Windows Task Manager to show you the activity of the CPU, your memory, and your storage device, your networking, what it's doing. And if you're on, that's Ethernet, and this one is Wi-Fi if you had it running. And the one thing I can't answer is, because I don't have many machines with a discrete GPU card, is whether the GPU will show up down here at the bottom and give you specifications on that. But it gives you information at the bottom of these, just like it does in Windows. The bad part is it's not an absolute thing. There may be things Windows is displaying, this one might not. But if you logged in to this system with Wayland, which is now available to update to a what will be released on Linux Mint version 3 in December, is all Wayland desktop supported, no longer experimental. And therefore you'll be able to take advantage of what it can do. The bad part, and it's only recently come out, people have discovered through a lot of research, primarily because of gamers, that there is a degradation delay in X-Wayland on games. And so right now, you don't want to run games in Wayland that really require a discrete GPU, because you'll have delays at certain points in time that will be noticeable. It only adds 9 point some millisecond delay, but that's enough for a lot of gamers. They can't use it. So the question is what's going to happen with X-Wayland? Is somebody going to update that, hopefully before Mint 23.0 comes out or not, to give a much improved performance of X-Wayland? Don't know. At least I haven't heard anything so far. So these are some of the things that if I was in Wayland right now, this would not have launched. It would have ignored launching that application. And that's understandable because it's all written for X11. And apparently something in the X11 support is not in X-Wayland. X-Wayland and Wayland itself does not cover all the nuances X11 currently can handle. We don't know if that ever will. That's one of the headaches. So in some cases, some software that'll run on Wayland or through X-Wayland may have to be modified by the developers of it to stay within what is capable currently in Wayland and X-Wayland, and not some unsupported X11 features. But how many would do that? Who knows? There's a lot of abandoned software out there for Linux that who knows if anybody will ever update them. The only other hope would be replacing X11 with an X Libre Office. I mean, not Libre Office. X Libre to work in place of X-Wayland. Then you have real support for X11 even within a Wayland environment may be possible. I don't know what conflicts you would run into, and it would not surprise me there would be, but I am seeing a lot of distros starting to drop the X11 and go to X Libre as their official compositor. So that's another little tidbit. We'll just have to all wait and see. The biggest thing that has come up, I'm not joking when I say it, some people who are more recent converts or are at least trying out Linux and they happen to choose Mint, they're seeing various features within the Linux Mint environment, even at 22.3, and they don't like it because they think there's a problem that or it's out of date or some damn thing. And they go to the About page and they contact the GNOME developers because it was a GNOME calendar. And there are many other pieces within Linux Mint that come, and they are unsupported versions, old versions that may be 2 to 4 years old, not current. And but GNOME is up in arms, clobbering the Mint team for not either A, taking those unsupported versions, making their own branded, own labeled versions of the app and distributing them with the distribution. And that way, the About page says, talk to the Linux Mint team and complain about it. And so right now there's a little war there. Linux Mint says, wait a minute, we didn't create the problem. Debian created the problem because that's what they include in Debian. Debian is the foundation for Ubuntu. So it gets in Ubuntu's versions. And Mint is based upon Ubuntu. So it's got those things. They're not taking the time to do their own changes. They just take it as is, like most people take the stuff and say, this is what it is. So there is a lot of software in the Debian world of distros that are running very outdated software, and newbies are finding this stuff and thinking there's either some kind of a bug or it's way outdated. Something needs to be changed. Well, if you were running the Linux with a GNOME desktop, there is no problem. They only have two versions, the current one and the previous one. And they're never more than 2 years out of date with the prior one. So there's a real little hullabaloo going on between the GNOME development team and Linux Mint got targeted. I don't know if they're doing the same kind of argument with Debian, Ubuntu, and all the other distributions based upon Debian and Ubuntu for the same problem they are screaming at Linux Mint team about. I don't understand a lot of the hullabaloo, but that may be because some of the programs that are being complained about, like the calendar function, I don't use calendar that much, at least not in Linux, and I used to use it only in a limited amount in Windows environment. So it depends upon each individual what they like and want to use. Now the $64 question is, have they bothered looking in Software Manager and or out in the Linux on internet to find more up-to-date versions and try them out themselves to get the functionality and features they want and are demanding errantly from the GNOME development team instead of the Mint development team. Where this is going to all fall out, I haven't got a clue. It's just one of these little things that's been popping up in the last couple of weeks. So I don't know if anybody's got any further ideas or comments they want to do, or do we want to try and get into a few of the articles that I have. Because we've already burned through 3/4 of the time. And even if we go 17 minutes past 9 to get the full 2 hours, we got about 45 minutes left that I can bring up some of the other articles. Going once, going twice. Sold. Darn it. You gotta be joking. This damn thing closed down. So good. All right. That. Come on. First article. I thought this was cute, and I'm not going to go through much of it, mostly because of limited time. Microsoft blows up the entire tech market with the latest announcement. I am dubious of this, but it's kind of funny and in line with what is going on. Whoops. I know I forgot one setting.
The most valuable software company in the world just made the biggest bet in tech, and Wall Street punished them for it anyway. On June 2nd, 2026, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella walked on stage in San Francisco and, in one keynote, announced an always-on AI agent that works while you sleep, a quantum chip the company says is 1,000 times more reliable than its last one, 7 new AI models built entirely in-house, and a version of Windows that no longer really looks like Windows. That is not a normal product keynote. It reads more like a declaration of war, and the rest of the industry noticed. To understand what Microsoft just did, you have to understand what they have been doing quietly for 3 years. While the headlines went to ChatGPT and Elon Musk and the benchmark fights, Microsoft was spending a lot. The company has committed roughly $190 billion in capital expenditures for 2026 alone, more than the annual output of some countries, pouring concrete into data centers, buying chips in bulk, and wiring up the infrastructure for a world that runs on AI. That number is big enough to make investors nervous. Microsoft stock fell nearly 24% in the first half of 2026, its worst start to a year since the dot-com crash in 2000. The market was telling Microsoft it was spending too fast and getting too far ahead of real demand. Nadella heard all of it. Then he took the Build 2026 stage and announced more anyway. The most disruptive thing they announced has a simple name: Scout. It isn't a chatbot, and it isn't Copilot with a fresh coat of paint. Microsoft calls it an autopilot agent, an always-on AI that lives inside your Microsoft 365 setup and doesn't wait for you to ask it anything. It reads your Teams messages, your Outlook threads, and your SharePoint files. It catches calendar conflicts before you spot them. It drafts the status report before you remember it's due. It flags the email chain that's about to slip through the cracks while it's still slipping, not...
Note that this is in MS 365. The funny part is, and this is hilarious as far as I'm concerned, MS 365, Adobe's products, and many other similar products that are cloud-based, they're all running on Linux, but you can't run them on a Linux OS directly, or not at all. And the only way you can do it is to create a Windows VM on a Linux system. Then you can run them because they all check just like the high-end AAA games that are still stuck in the Windows world. So you have a situation where we're on Linux. The software is designed for Linux. And if you haven't heard, as of the beginning of July, Microsoft released their Linux version 4 for Azure. It's cloud-based server application, and you can also run it on your local machine. It does not come with a DE, but anybody who is experienced in Linux knows you can install your own DE, do your own customizations to the DE, and use it as a desktop. Technically, that's what Windows Pro is. It's a stripped down version of a server operating system for Windows Enterprise, and they put a desktop on top of it. Then they stripped it down further to make Windows Home. So why is it we cannot run what's running on Linux cloud servers straight on our Linux operating systems? That's my question. I don't have an answer to it, but I found it quite humorous.
After. Scout runs with its own digital identity inside your organization. It has its own account, its own permissions, and its own audit trail. It is not a feature you switch on. In Microsoft's own words, it is a virtual coworker. It is built on OpenClaw, the open source agent framework that spread across the AI world in early 2026 before its creator got hired away by OpenAI. And Scout wraps that framework in the kind of governance enterprises actually require.
My question is, how many businesses want this thing going through all their business files, their communiques, etc., and having access to such sensitive information that competitors would dearly love to get their hands on? Especially since this is in Microsoft's cloud, not in the enterprise's cloud.
One OpenClaw agent reportedly went rogue inside a researcher's inbox earlier this year. The industry got a preview of what an unsupervised AI agent could do. Scout is Microsoft's answer, autonomous AI with an accountability structure bolted on. Microsoft expects Scout to help manage what it projects will be 1.3 billion AI agents automating office work by 2028. That is not a typo. It is 1.3 billion agents, each taking a slice of the scheduling, drafting, and coordinating that currently fills the workday for hundreds of millions of people. Scout is the interface sitting in front of all of it. The question every IT manager and CEO is quietly asking is not whether that is impressive, it is whether they are ready to trust it. Then Microsoft did something that had physicists arguing in real time. They unveiled Majorana 2, the newest version of their topological quantum chip, which the company says is 1,000 times more reliable than the last one. Not 10 times, 1,000. The trick is a materials change that sounds almost too simple. Microsoft swapped aluminum for lead as the chip's superconductor, and the resulting qubits survive an average of 20 full seconds, versus the microseconds quantum bits usually last before they collapse. Some lasted close to a minute. In quantum computing, that isn't a tuning improvement, it's a different class of result. Microsoft says Majorana 2 has them on track to build a commercially viable, scalable quantum computer by 2029, which cuts their original timeline in half. If the chip really works the way they describe, the consequences are hard to overstate. Quantum computers don't just run faster, they can solve problems classical machines can't touch at all. Modeling complex molecules for drug discovery, cracking the optimization math behind supply chains and financial markets, and breaking the encryption the internet currently runs on. A scalable quantum computer by 2029 wouldn't just give Microsoft a new product line. It would give whoever controls it a kind of computational advantage with no real modern equivalent. Here's where the physics complicates things. On the day of the announcement, Scientific American reported that independent physicists say Microsoft's topological qubit approach, the whole basis of Majorana 2, does not work and never has. Outside experts called the claims extraordinary and the evidence thin. Microsoft's history here makes that sting. The original Majorana 1 chip was unveiled in 2025 with a lot of fanfare, and the scientific community's doubts never fully cleared. Majorana 2 doesn't erase that. It's asking the field to trust the company one more time on a timeline that's now half as long, with stakes that are twice as high. The number that will actually settle this won't come from a press conference. It'll show up in peer-reviewed journals, and people will be watching for it. Under the two headline announcements, Microsoft slipped in something the industry has been waiting for with a mix of anticipation in dread. 7 new AI models built entirely in-house by Microsoft AI, not licensed from OpenAI, not co-developed with a partner, their own. The lineup covers reasoning, coding, image generation, transcription, and voice. MAI, Thinking 1 is Microsoft's first dedicated reasoning model. MAI Code 1 Flash is an agentic coding model built for GitHub Copilot. Then there's MAI Image 2.5, MAI Transcribe 1.5, and MAI Voice 2. 7 models, shipped at once, announced next to Scout and Majorana 2 almost like a footnote. They aren't a footnote. Right now, 45% of Microsoft's $625 billion contracted backlog is tied to one customer, OpenAI. That concentration has spooked Wall Street in a way no amount of reassurance has fixed. Every Microsoft model that's good enough, fast enough, and cheap enough to run inside a Microsoft product without calling OpenAI's servers makes the company a little less dependent. The MAI models aren't frontier models the way GPT-5 is, but they don't have to be. They just have to be good enough for the everyday jobs Microsoft products do at a price that doesn't leave nearly $500 billion of future revenue riding on a partner that's out signing deals with Amazon and Oracle at the same time.
I'm going to stop it there, and you can watch the rest if you want to. Oracle is another company that appears to be in deep doo-doo, and they're the owners, creators of VMware, which is getting really whacked, and they also have the rights to VirtualBox, which a lot of average people, besides some businesses, also use. So I'm going to move on to the next one. This is one of the news articles I get.
Hundreds of Linux security alerts landed recently, but the headlines leave out the most important part. Codeberg, a major open source code hosting platform, is drawing a new line around AI-generated code. Valve is stretching out their arm for a new frame of mind for running Linux, and Jellyfin is entering a major new chapter behind the scenes. All of this and more on This Week in Linux, your source for Linux good news. Would you like to get a bunch of cool perks like early access to my content, unedited stuff, vote in member-only polls, go behind the scenes of my content, or hang out with me in members-only hangouts? I just wanted to thank you all for helping me keep making this show. Very much appreciated. Now, let's jump into this episode of This Week in Linux. And first up this week, Codeberg is drawing a new line around AI-generated code. Codeberg says their Forge is for collaboration, not an endless landfill of robot side projects. Basically, Codeberg is putting AI-generated repositories on notice, though there is some nuance to that notice. Members of Codeberg EV, the nonprofit group behind the community-run Software Forge, approved 2 AI-related motions after a 14-day voting period. The first commits Codeberg to keeping hosted code and user data out of generative AI training. The second changes their terms of use to prohibit projects that mostly consist of code written by tools like Claude or Codex. That motion passed with 358 votes in favor, 144 votes against, and 14 who chose not to vote. The rule targets projects built primarily through generative AI while leaving room for human-led development that uses AI assistance. The Codeberg team says active communities, older projects, and maintainers who accepted an occasional AI-generated contribution are unlikely to be affected. Small experiments with little resources usage, well, they may also be tolerated. The projects most likely to run into trouble are autonomous agent-built repositories, projects maintained through heavy LLM use, and repositories consuming far more storage or CI/CD resources. They say this is more than just about code quality. AI crawlers have hammered their servers with expensive requests, maintainers are spending more time reviewing low-effort submissions, and even if the repository is free, the storage and CI/CD cost money. The Codeberg team also says the type of drive that they use that once cost about $700, or actually €700, now costs roughly 3,700 euros and is often unavailable to purchase. So a little bit of a bummer there. But enforcement will happen case by case, with moderators responding to specific situations instead of automatically scanning every repository. Codeberg also says existing projects won't face an immediate mass deletion campaign. They want their limited resources supporting software with human ownership, maintenance, and collaboration, but aren't going to drop an anvil on everyone. But they are using an ambiguous qualifier when they say repos that mostly use AI-generated code, because that leaves some gray area, like what constitutes mostly. Is it 51% or 80% or that sort of thing? And the enforcement will decide how well this policy works. AI code versus vibe coding is so interesting to me. I see AI-assisted development as a viable tool for skilled professional developers, that is. And I don't have any problem with devs using AI for that kind of thing. But vibe coding is sketch at best. For those that don't know, vibe coding does not mean all code made by AI is whatever. It's a term that describes someone who uses AI to generate code and doesn't understand how to write code. They generate it, trust it blindly, and share it. That's vibe coding. Also, by the way, this term was coined by OpenAI, one of the co-founders of OpenAI, as a good thing. Yeah, I mean, seriously, they act like it's a good thing. So he said that there's a new kind of coding I call vibe coding, where you fully give in to the vibes, embrace exponentials, and forget that the code even exists. It's not too bad for throwaway weekend projects, but still quite amusing. I'm building a project or a web app, but it's not really coding. I just see stuff, say stuff, run stuff, and copy and paste stuff, and it mostly works. Gross. And some people actually see this as an example that vibe coding is a good thing, and that's a shame. Anyway, the Codeberg community wants the vibe on the forge to be code, not the code on the forge to be vibes. And while Codeberg is narrowing what they want to host, Valve and Collabora are expanding where Arch Linux can run. Valve's Steam Frame is using an ARM64 processor, and since SteamOS is based on Arch Linux, that means they need Arch Linux to run where Arch officially doesn't. Valve already builds SteamOS on an adapted version of Arch Linux, very adapted, it's super customized, but SteamFrame uses an ARM64 processor while upstream Arch officially supports just x86-64 and not ARM. So Valve and Collabora created HoloCore, a pure ARC64 port designed as the foundation for SteamFrame's operating system. Collabora has now released the first preview with source code, binary packages, and a development container. Now, this is not a simple recompile everything type of situation. Arch's rolling release model turns that job into dependency archaeology, especially when you add on the SteamOS component where there's a lot of customization. So packages constantly move forward in Arch, and the team can't always build them in the order that they enter the Arch repos. New versions may also depend on older versions. So Collabora used Rust as an example. Building version 1.91 may require 1.90, which first requires 1.89. It's dependency nesting dolls, except every doll in the nest can break the package manager. Collabora built tooling that replays Arch's package history from an initial bootstrap to a chosen snapshot. Their GitLab CI system calculates the dependency tree, handles intermediate rebuilds, and produces repeatable ARM64 packages. The preview focuses on several thousand packages needed for SteamFrame development and system images, and the remaining Arch packages sit outside this first scope. HoloCore currently serves as a proof of concept. Developers can test it directly on ARM64 hardware or use DistroBox with QEMU emulation from an x86 system. The team plans to publish their build tooling and turn this snapshot into a continuous system that follows Arch as it changes. The engineering may actually outlive the headset it was built for, because Arch Linux still labels ARC64 support as unofficial, and Collabora wants to work with the upstream Arch community and existing porting efforts. HoloCore gives Valve a reproducible ARM64 base for SteamFrame, while potentially helping Arch move closer to first-class ARM64 support. I think this is cool in terms of expanding support for Arch on ARM, but I'm not that big of a fan of ARM in general. If you'd like to know why, I answered that in a Linux Q&A video that I made a little while back, so check the cards or the description for the link. Now, of course, software foundations still depend on people who can maintain them, which brings us to Jellyfin's leadership situation. 3 longtime Jellyfin contributors left within days of each other, and one of them took an official client with him. That sounds like Project Disaster territory, but the full story is far less dramatic. While the Jellyfin's leadership chart needs an update, but your media server doesn't need an evacuation plan. Joshua Boniface, I said that right, sorry if I didn't, resigned as Jellyfin's project leader on July 19th after leading the project for more than 7 years. He described years of mounting burnout, management stress, user criticism, and declining motivation. Joshua said Jellyfin had grown into a large project that needed more people management than he enjoyed or that he could provide. Core team member Anthony Lovato is also stepping away because personal changes leave him less time for the project. He plans to help transition or transfer his administrative responsibilities and potentially for as long as a year. And then we have Andrew, another founding contributor. His departure is separate and carries more tension. So Andrew had been rewriting Jellyfin's desktop client to improve performance, maintainability, and GPU acceleration, as well as HDR playback. And he said disagreements over his development process drained his motivation, including resistance related to AI-assisted tooling. He left the Jellyfin organization and moved that client into his own repository under the name Jellium Desktop. So yes, Jellium is technically a forked project, but it's an unofficial desktop client that still connects to the Jellyfin servers. So it was an official client that was then moved to unofficial, but it's not really necessarily a fork. It is not a hostile fork of any sort, especially of like the Jellyfin media server or anything like that. And Andrew isn't trying to replace the entire Jellyfin ecosystem. Think of it like in one application leaving the official app collection to become third party, but it still integrates directly. Joshua's transition is proceeding through Jellyfin's constitution. He says the existing contributors who already handle most development remain in place, and he says that Jellyfin 12.0 is still moving forward, and Joshua plans to continue maintaining project infrastructure while someone else takes over leadership. The timing looks alarming because 3 departures landed almost together, but the underlying story is a project growing faster than its volunteer leadership structure could comfortably support. Jellyfin remains active while Jellium Desktop now continues independently. But open source depends heavily on volunteers, and passion alone can't sustain endless development or deal with all the support requests, bug reports, moderation, and project management. If a project grows, especially if it grows too quickly, a small group of maintainers can end up carrying responsibilities that feel like a full-time job rather than a hobby. And sometimes, well, often, that doesn't come with enough help, enough funding, or even recognition, so burnout is not that uncommon. Burnout can make valuable contributors step away temporarily or even permanently. So I wanted to thank Joshua, Anthony, and Andrew, and everyone else in the Jellyfin team for the work that they've been doing and the continued work for the rest of the team. And I wish all the devs who stepped down the best and hope the project continues thriving, because I do think it is an important project to exist, and I hope it continues to do so. Also, by the way, to anyone who thinks burnout isn't real and just something made up as an excuse, I've heard that before many times. Well, I can tell you it is a legit medical thing. Honestly, I didn't think it was a real thing myself for a while, and then I felt it myself a few years ago, and I had to take time to recover from it. I even had to pause on making Twill during that time. So, yeah, it's a thing. It needs to be betterly named because everybody thinks that it's just like a made-up term, but it is a thing. Anyway, and the Jellyfin volunteers aren't the only maintainers that are facing a big workload, because the Linux team just published 432 kernel CVEs. The Linux team published 432 kernel CVEs in roughly 31 hours, but that is not as scary as it sounds. It doesn't mean that 432 new emergency vulnerabilities have been discovered. I know a lot of headlines are going to blow this out of proportion for the clicks and everything, but it's not as bad as it sounds. The batch appeared between July 19 and July 20th. I know at first glance it sounds like the kernel caught fire and someone is assigning each flame its own tracking number, but the real story starts a little over 2 years ago, back in February 2024, when the Linux kernel team became their own official CVE numbering authority. For those that don't know, CVE stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures, which means that something with a CVE number could be a vulnerability or an exposure, which theoretically could result in a vulnerability given the right circumstances or whatever. So essentially, that makes a CVE assigned that could be bad, but also it could be meh. The Linux kernel project became a CVE numbering authority, or CNA, because there were a lot of CVEs that were being assigned that were either incorrectly assigned as issues, given absurd ratings from people who weren't really able to rate them properly, and even a couple real things not being assigned at all. Now, this lets them take charge of their own security tracking and prevent vendors or researchers from gaming a very messy system that was there before, which was happening. The kernel CVE team now uses a deliberately broad policy. The kernel runs at the most privileged layer of a system, so almost any bug could have a security impact under the right conditions. When the team identifies that kind of bug fix in a stable kernel, they assign a CVE after the fix is already available. So these IDs largely catalog fixed bugs across a massive code base. A CVE number identifies an issue, while its severity, exploitability, hardware relevance, and urgency require separate rating system. That's why you'll see sometimes a CVE with a 2.0 rating, which means it's very minor, or if any real-world impact at all, or a 9.5 or even a 10, which means something hit the fan. Also, something I think is worth noting is that not all of the Linux kernel is used in every distro. Some distros ship different kernel versions with different compile flags and different features, so your computer may not even use an affected portion of the kernel depending on which CVE we're talking about. Greg Crow-Hartman, a core kernel maintainer, explained the sudden Sunday flood himself. He had finally found time to catch up with a review queue that had been pending for weeks. Conferences and vacations had delayed the work. Basically, it boils down to he cleared the backlog on a Sunday and a bunch of people panicked on Monday. So essentially, these are bugs that are already fixed, and he is just assigning numbers to them so that they are identified and cataloged. For most users, it's all good. Just install kernel updates from your distro when they send them to you, and you'll be just fine. Now, speaking of vulnerabilities, Canonical has 3 snap vulnerabilities that need a closer look. Canonical fixed 3 snap vulnerabilities, including 2 high security flaws that weaken snap confinement. Basically, they tried to make snap confine use fewer privileges and accidentally gave attackers a path to all of them. To be clear, these are local privilege escalation issues, not remote code execution, so it's another one of those sounds much worse than it really is type of things. And again, they are already fixed. Qualys found the high severity flaw in the component snapd uses to build a snaps sandbox, which is snap confine, and the newer design replaced a setuid root binary with a smaller set of capabilities. That reduced its standing privileges, but it also left temporary files briefly owned by the calling user, while snap confine still held near root powers. So an attacker with a local account could use this by mounting a fuse file system, redirect a file through a symlink, and plant a udev rule that executes its root. Security hardening's favorite gotcha strikes again. Remove one big privilege and then discover that the smaller privileges form the ladder to root. Canonical also fixed 2 other issues. The first one let strictly confined snaps create and execute setuid binaries because the default SEC comp template missed that restriction. The second issue let confined snaps reach a systemd user DVD interface and potentially read hashed password information. Now, these issues lived in snapd and snap confine, which Canonical develops publicly as GPL3 open source software. So no, the closed store debate is still a thing, and I agree that they should open it, but these vulnerabilities came from a separate layer running locally on the computer, not on the Snap Store, so it's not...
Okay, I'm going to end it there. We're really out of time at this point. I'm going to put in the chat the handout, and Donna, I'll send you the stuff in an email. Let's see. Okay, it should be out there now. Okay. How are you, Bob?
Let's see how I am. Got it.
Okay. All right. Next meeting that's coming up will be Keeping Up with Tech on August 6th. And let's see. Then Tips and Tricks SIG will be on the 11th. So those are the next two upcoming meetings starting off August. Anybody got any final comments, questions, etc.?
I may not make the next Linux SIG because Margaret's not scheduled for jury duty about the same time.
Well, I hope they don't find you guilty.
Not for me, unless she's going to be on a grand jury. Then I
Well,
might have some worries.
grand juries sound fishy to me, at least the way some of them are recently.
The thing is, the jurors get chosen for about a year and a half.
Wow.
It's a major commitment.
Yeah, sounds like it. All right, well, I think we've got to call it a night. And best of luck. Look through that list. That's a month's worth of information that I called out over the course of the month. That's what the handout always covers. Same for Windows. I've got some juicy stuff for August Windows group. But it takes time to go through all that stuff. And I guarantee it'll take you some time. The only suggestion I've got, if an article in the listing seems interesting, open up a browser, open up a tab, go out and get an AI login, and say, give me a summary of this video, and then give it the URL, and it'll give you back a summary, and you can decide whether to invest time watching it or skip it. It's best information I can give you. I usually watch all the videos, or at least 3/4 of the videos, and that includes some videos that run between 1 and 2 hours long. And I only use the summary option now and then when I'm really pressed for time for other things. I prefer going through them, listening to what's going on, and I have a few contributors' videos I would like to put out, but I don't care for some of the language being used by the people. I understand they are very passionate, but some of the verbiage I don't care for. If there was only a tiny bit of such verbiage, then I let it go. But usually they get carried away. So there's some content I don't want to pass on. So anything else? If not, we'll call it a night and a month, and we'll